Hello,
thank you for being with us here on the New Life Educational Series with Dr. Michael Laitman. Hello, Dr. Laitman. Hello. Hello, Nitza Mazuz. Hello. And together with you, we want to learn from Rav Laitman how to take our lives forward toward a new life. We're learning from him that the key is to build the relations between us as one family. And in each of our discussions, we're trying to open up this term, what it means to live as one family. And today we're going to deal with a very special issue that has a very respected place in all of Jewish culture, above all other issues of our life, and that is the principles of education according to the Jewish culture. You have a lot to learn here, whether you're a grandparent, a parent, or if you're a child yourself. We'll try to take this subject as far as we can regarding different insights for our life, and we'll all be able to take something practical for implementing right now in our life on our way to a better life. Nitza, open the subject, please. So what is actually education? It's a process of learning where a person acquires knowledge, capabilities, values. Through this, he shapes his character, his thoughts, his viewpoint, his behavior to the environment, the people around him. And today we want to look and understand why the subject of education is so important in Jewish culture. What is it about it that's so special? The culture, education are not the correct words to express the importance of creating a human that exists in our society. Because making a person is truly the foundation of the Jewish people. We came out of Babylon. We escaped from Babylon, along with Abraham leading us, where we actually began to build ourselves as a people through education. The education of love thy neighbor as thyself, the global integral education like we now want to and have to provide to all of humanity. Here, this education was the principle of the existence of the nation, because before this education, we were just Babylonians. We used to live in a primitive, natural manner, egoistically, regular, like everyone, like nature managed us. And Abraham, that gathered us together from all of Babylon, he attracted us by saying we need to be re-educated. We need to be new people, the opposite of what we were before. Before, each one to the other was a wolf, actually. That's how it broke out in Babylon. That's how a person saw his fellow man. And we need to do the opposite. We need to educate ourselves to be loved ones in connection, in love. One man is one heart. That is education, but education that it's not just some nice addition, but it's actually the root and basis of the whole nation. That's why we exist, because our nation is not natural like all the nations of the world. The education is what arranges and builds us, each and every one of us, and the connection between us, and then you have a people. Without that, you don't have anything. That's why it's such a fundamental thing. And ever since then, 3,800 years approximately, 3,500 years, it still remains the most central issue, that without that you don't have a Jewish people, and you don't have a Jew, you don't have a Jewish people or the Israeli nation. And it's true, because without that we're like the nations of the world, meaning our appreciation for education is so great, for the values of education. It still needs to be understood. Therefore, it's written that a father must teach his son, and there's an obligation to do that. And since the days of Abraham onward, we didn't have, at least boys, no son that didn't learn to read or write, math, the basic principles of our education, what it means to be a man, what it means to be Jewish, to be attracted to unity, mutual responsibility, love of thy fellow man, etc. And these principles of education, since then we've written many books about it, and we see that each time it's growing, especially when we came out of Egypt. So what's the entire Torah if not education? How you need to behave with yourself and with the inanimate, vegetative, animate, and especially human levels of your nation and all the nations and the entire world, and with the upper force even, which is God, which is nature in Gematria, the universe, how you have to treat it. It's truly, the attitude toward education is from the behavior of a person with himself, inside himself, and in an environment where he's alone and with everyone and the whole world. It's not education, but rather it's shaping a person. Therefore, it's called will make a man. To shape a person so that afterward you can say you have a person that belongs to the nation. He needs to know everything about himself, about others, about the proper behavior in every place and how. Shulchan Aruch. Of the behavior, culture, education of everyone. This is a universal education that the whole nation received. Abraham, then Moses taught everyone. He divided them into tens, hundreds, thousands. The whole people in the 40 years in the desert, they went through this education. And until they weren't prepared to be as one people, truly, they couldn't enter the land of Israel. What does it mean, a universal education? Not all kinds of methods and systems, varieties, that each one jumps up and says he has a new method, and that he wants to develop it and work with it and come to some audience with it. But rather, it's the same education for everyone, the exact same education. It either comes from the source of Abraham or another version from Moses with additions. We never had education people that it was a separate profession, but we rather had wise people who knew education themselves, and they were wise because their wisdom was based on the correct and proper and deep education, that they educated themselves properly in the wisdom of life. They also led education. They were the head of the generations. Therefore, the education books exist thousands of years that you don't see in any nation, how to teach and what to learn. Either it's under the tree, like Rabbi Akiva, that he taught his students, or in all kinds of other places, the Sanhedrin, all kinds of places they used to learn. People used to gather in synagogues, in a central place, and they would be taught. Never. From the days of Abraham, there was no man that didn't know reading and writing, the history, and he wasn't educated according to the right education with himself and with what's outside of him, with people, nature, animals, trees, everything, what they don't teach today. Today, there's just, you're not allowed to break something, you're not allowed to walk there, there's no such thing. With us, in our education, in our books of education, and what they taught everyone, it is written in such a manner that it belongs to each and every detail of a person, to everything, to himself, to the environment and the world. And therefore, apart from the last few generations, where there was, we mixed up with other nations, and we started to learn from the nations of the world, and we started to pick up their culture and education, it was clear to us what we need to learn ourselves, how to teach our kids, and with what. And in the last 200 years, of course, everything started becoming corrupt. We started to be influenced by the education of the nations of the world. There's assimilation. And today, the opposite. We're successful at their education, even more than they are. I really want to ask about this issue. When we look at all of human history, we see in the old tribes, medieval times, the parents, and let's say the wise, elderly ones of the tribe, they were the ones that educated, and they always gave wisdom of life. And here I want you to show us the difference. What's the difference between the wisdom of life that they taught in the whole world and the wisdom of life that those wise people taught that you mentioned before? With us, behavior is not natural. The wisdom of behavior is truly wisdom, because there's a need to educate a person to relate to himself, to his fellow man, to all of nature, in a manner that he doesn't have in his natural urges. That if the elderly in some nation used to sit and teach the young ones all kinds of phenomena of nature and how to use it in an instinctive manner that they accepted, and they used to educate them in this manner, like today as well in the human culture. With us, with our Jewish culture, it's the opposite. We teach a person how to be above nature, against his human nature. Love thy neighbor as thyself. It's not based on our nature. Don't do to your friend like you wouldn't want done to yourself, and be connected as one man with one heart. All of Israel are friends, being in mutual responsibility to one another. This education requires not just a story, that a person agrees to it and is prepared and using it without any resistance from himself, but rather our education requires the penetration of education. It requires work. It really requires education from a very young age. Education actually goes through the entire life. It doesn't end at a young age. It takes up your whole life, right up to the end of your life. A person must renew it and advance in it, because each time his struggle with his nature, it's being renewed and it's constant. Therefore, the power of education is always escalating. Education would change in various eras if we were thrown among the other nations, then we would have had to renew the education and be in very difficult struggles to continue it, because our entire struggle with the nations of the world that we were among was about us having to continue our education. Otherwise, we wouldn't have succeeded to carry out the entire exile as a people. We would have become assimilated a long time ago. In other words, the education maintained us. It strengthened us. With its help, we reached where we are today as a people, which is a wonder of history, that we have no country without any piece of land, without anything, without any organization. The education would organize, arrange, connect us, and that same education for all the Jews in the whole world, wherever they are, that is actually what saved us. Therefore, it is the root and foundation of the people. And if for the other nations it's just a nice addition and it changes, since we need to work in front of our nature, above our nature, across from our nature, make ourselves are human, because we know we're not born as humans, we're born as animals. That's what our education shows us. And we need to rise up to build a human out of ourselves that's similar to divine values of love and connection. Then it turns out that this also always obligated us to deal with education. You mentioned assimilation. I also want to add, it also demanded from the parents to be educators, meaning they were always looking after this, and according to the values that they gave children, and to the extent that the children were educated correctly according to the Israeli education, then the parents also received appreciation and status in society. All the families, it was all measured, appreciated only according to whether the education was successful. From the family, where it was truly in the family, and you need to invest in a child as much as possible, playing an instrument, and all kinds of dancing, everything that has to do with education. It was all also truly the family would invest in that everything, truly. And it remained. And until today, I know that same population that I grew up with. A Jewish child must finish university. There's no other way. He has to be educated. He has to know. He really has to study all the time. The parents would look after it all the time, that the child is studying. And that's how it was in every family. It doesn't matter if they're rich, poor, that's the main thing, to place the kids to be educated, to understand as much as possible, to know as much as possible, and to have connections for life. Of course, that's become ruined, and lately our education has begun to be the education of the nations of the world, and we're successful there as well, because they're continuing with the same trend that's in our genes. And today, when we're in the new era, then we actually have to go back to the foundations, principles of our education. We're returning to the same situation that we had in Babylon, and we're in the same great crisis that they had in Babylon, but it's just the dimensions of the entire world. And we need to begin with this integral education that Abraham used to teach. Love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the foundation of our nation, until we reach the point where we have to present it to the world, where The whole world has to enter that law to receive the same education. Therefore, what we are doing today, we are actually, again, we are the educational body, if we're talking about ourselves, about our organization. We're an educational organization that first and foremost, there's people that are being educated according to the Abraham's method in order to bring them afterward, to bring them to the practical implementation of this, all of the people of Israel, and later to all of humanity. So before we get into the principles, I want to emphasize I've had a very interesting perception. Assimilation, I suddenly understood that it's actually, there was this special educational method that the Jewish people have, love thy neighbor as thyself, and that was abandoned on the side, and instead we began to learn and adopt all kinds of educational approaches that are general. You said it's education according to the nations of the world. Even more than that, we can also count the periods of exile and periods of awakening and coming out of exile according to education. What does it mean to be in galut? To be under the control of the foreign education. And going out of exile, and we go back to our principles and renew them and we continue with them. That is actually galut and gula, galut and redemption, according to values that we live by. And therefore, how do we measure that we're in a diaspora? When the connection, love thy neighbor as thyself, stops and unfounded hatred start, that's the beginning of exile. And it doesn't matter. We had to leave the land of Israel, the land, or be here or there. If we're not in the education of love thy fellow man, then we're in exile. So today also, even though we're in the land of Israel, apparently, geographically, we're still in exile. That we're not capable of determining for ourselves the correct education and carry it out, at least in something, to begin with something, renewing something, to renew the society, to renew the people of Israel. And that's why we're still called kibbutz galuyot. The importance of learning at a young age. There was a very big importance to put a child into learning at the age of 3. Why from such a young age? It's also in our education that 2 years old is the breastfeeding still and a year of preparation, but at the age of 3, you start education from the age of 0, that's clear, and you start looking after the education of the parents. The parents are educated and they know that when the kids come, how to begin to educate them. From the youngest age, they look after that. The way we relate to a person who is born is the same attitude as a big person. We continually need to educate him, and even if he's not capable of it, it doesn't matter. Then you do instead of him what he needs to do. I don't want to advertise the religious education here, that they'll say something, but it starts with, if a son is born, the father that comes to the hospital to visit the mother, the first moment that he's standing there after the birth, what does he bring the mother if it's a son? A kippah. He puts it on the son's head, And then she breastfeeds him. What's the significance of that? It's a symbol. What's the symbol? That what a child can't do by himself, the parents do for him. So they put this skull cap on his head. It's like a cover, but gradually, in everything, what he could do as a big person and doesn't do, I do in his place. And I teach him gradually to take from me this behavior and continue it himself. This is how it works. In other words, it's under me, it's under my control, under my protection. So I am responsible for his behavior being correct to such an extent from the age of 0. And at the age of 3, they start to learn the ABC. Why is it important to learn reading and writing at such a young age? It's not a young age at all, but rather, according to a person's nature, that's how it has to be. This approach is from the old days, from the days of Abraham. It's not that we today have to quickly teach him because he has to learn computers and cell phones and know that stuff. No, it's because a person begins to receive his form as a human, his shape from the age of 3, where he already needs to get into a connection with the culture, with the wisdom, and therefore you begin learning at the age of 3. Another interesting principle that we have in culture is that we see that we're always, education goes through people who are experienced, that they pass on like this fatherly wisdom. It's some encapsulation of some wisdom that is handed down from father to son. And there's an issue here that nobody thinks it's his personal wisdom. They bring quotes from the prophets and they get the feeling that he's basing it on that and it's going down through the generations. First of all, it prevents any father from doing all kinds of, making up all kinds of things in education. There's no such thing. No one should have such an idea like that he has something that he knows from himself. But just the opposite. Everyone learns from the same sources. Everyone learns the same forms of behavior. Everyone has a clear image what a human, a perfect human, has to be as a man or a woman, and it's written about in a very clear manner, and there's no doubt that it has to be accepted by everyone and as a law by everyone. In other words, the Torah includes in it this entire image that you need to want to accept for yourself. The parents use the Torah as a law that exists above them. There's many parts to it, what a person needs to know and how to behave with himself and the world. And that's why with the power of the Torah, and it's all agreed upon by the entire nation and everyone's obligated to do it, and they come with this to the child, and it's clear to the child that he has to accept it. Everyone around him is being educated in this manner, and everyone understands each other. Otherwise, his behavior will be very strange in the eyes of others, and it will immediately be felt, and the parents will be ashamed, and he'll be ashamed if he doesn't behave like others. The attitude is very rational, knowing a person's nature completely. You emphasize now that parents don't come make things up by themselves, the perfect image. They need to prove to a child that it's the obligation. If not, we punish you. They pressure him. There's no other way. This is how it's written. That's what everyone does, and the same for you. It's the environment. So there's something that's accepted as the perfect form of a human being, and the parent's role is to bring their son or daughter to be a perfect person as it's defined in the Jewish history since the beginning of time, and it doesn't change. You're saying there's some lofty definition that prevents anyone from being a wise one and making up his own opinions and ideas. Now I have a question about that. If we're looking at our history as the Jewish people, there were many, many generations where the people were truly connected to the laws of Judaism, each one according to his awareness, attainment, a wiser person. But there was some general agreement about that image of the perfect person. He's completely love thy neighbor as thyself, done to others as you would want done to yourself. To the extent that it was possible to give it to a person, a simple person, in the days of exile. I'm talking about from the dawn of Jewish history, the entire Jewish history, and we see there were periods where there was an understanding what this image of the perfect person was, the ideal that we're aspiring to. I'm succeeding like this, she's succeeding like that, but we knew what we were aspiring to. Afterwards, we went through periods in exile, and I want to get closer to our history. Since from a few hundred years ago, our people split up into the secular and religious sectors. So today, when you speak about us needing to go back to the original Jewish root, our original values, it's not 200 years ago. I'm talking about that same culture that we had in the days of Rabbi Akiva. So you're not saying, it's not like you're saying the secular religious approach, the separation we have today, you're not taking a certain stand that we need to do it like this or like this. You're saying there's something that's a foundation above everything else. It's the single root that we have, and it's called the perfect person. I'm not calling the nation of Israel that it exists for the last 2,000 years. That's not the people of Israel. There's no people of Israel in exile. There's no such thing. It's just potentially that it can come back to its true roots. Because again, since we have this foundation, love thy neighbor as thyself, and when it exists, we're a nation. When it exists, we exist. When it doesn't exist, we're not a people. And our culture and education is also not like that. Who teaches today, love thy neighbor as thyself? Go through the whole nation, secular, religious, ask them. The sign of exile is really implemented to such an extent that we completely disconnected from this attitude. So you're saying, even when you say Torah is something that defines how a person relates to himself, to others, to the plants, to the still, to all of nature, to all of universe and the upper force, it's not a religious attitude to life against a secular approach. No, it has nothing to do with it. It has to do with, if we're talking about love of your fellow man, that's the principle of the education, the nation's education. And then we're a nation. Doesn't matter if it's Israel or not Israel. According to that, we would also exist in Babylon. When you say love of your fellow man, if I take this term right to the end, then you actually mean the definition that you gave before, how a person relates to himself and everything around him, where there's other people, creatures, all of nature, and even the upper force. So his fellow man is everything that's outside of him. So in your eyes, the definition of the Torah of Israel, the tradition of Israel for a perfect human, is someone who loves everything. And that's what he exists for, because it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Meaning I have an obligation to love everything that's outside myself. This is how I must use myself. that at each moment of my existence, I must only see how I implement myself with love toward my fellow man. And this is plants, animals, humans, God, everything. And where's the place of education in this process? It's everything. There's nothing apart from education. That's what the Torah is demanding from us. That's what the nation is demanding from us. This is the truth. A single person, everyone must reach it because it says you must love. But you defined a very clear goal now. From a person to everything. That's the perfect man. Education, where is it? I'm not born as a complete person. I had a mother, a father, I'm a little baby. I'm not a perfect person. It looks like there's a whole path of my personal development until I reach the goal where I'm a complete person. Where does education come into this process? It's everything. Without education, you can't carry it out because according to your nature, you're the opposite of love, of loving your fellow man. According to your nature, you're an egoist. You see how kids behave, how they want to just grab everything for themselves, and the whole world is their own, and they don't want to take anyone into consideration. So education starts before a person's even born. And then afterwards, from the first day that he's born, he has to feel this attitude in the environment around him, with his parents, with other people, brothers and sisters, everyone. Education is like air, oxygen. It's in the air. This thought and desire of the environment that are all toward love of your fellow man, they have to fill the air around a person that's born. He has to feel it, that this is how everyone's behaving, every movement, every thought, every look, in everything. That's what he learns from. He doesn't know what anyone's talking about, and he doesn't matter, but he can already drink in truly from everyone how they behave, how they act, how they talk to each other. He's already absorbing all this. And then what happens to him? That's what education is. What happens to the person that absorbs it? Whether he wants to or not. In this way, he begins to use his attributes. He begins to take part in society, even though it's against his nature. But he's already treating others differently. He receives it as some kind of program, new program for life, instead of a natural program that he has in him. It says to profit off everyone, succeed, etc., according to what our ego is pushing us to advance toward, taking advantage of others. Instead of that, he's gradually beginning to understand in a natural way how to use himself for the sake of others. It all depends on education. We can give this education in such a way that it will be convenient for him. I was taught at a young age to brush my teeth, let's say. I can't not brush my teeth, otherwise I don't feel good. I was taught to wash myself and do all kinds of things in my life, etc. And it's very difficult for me to get rid of it. It's habit becomes second nature. Habit in how I relate to others, in using myself, that I use my body and all my nature. Man needs to see himself from the side, how he's using his body and his brain and his feelings and everything that he has and everything that he received from nature, hormones and genes, how he's using this whole machine to be good to others. That is actually education. And in that, I'm dividing a person into two. External criticism and the person himself. He has to be a psychologist for himself. Hang on here, I lost you. I understood that education, its goal is to teach a person to provide him with above nature abilities to use everything above him, everything in him like a machine for the sake of others. And now you're saying he's divided into two. That I didn't understand. I want him to be critical to himself, to criticize himself, that he'll look at himself objectively from the outside, that he'll see himself from the outside as an expert, as an expert. I don't know what to call it. He'll see himself in such a way that he's not dependent on others, and he'll see what he is compared to that image that he needs to reach. What does he need to check exactly? He needs to know his attributes, his foundations, his values that he's existing with now, what he received from nature, who he is. He needs to know compared to who he needs to become. This is truly great work a person does, and he's always dealing with it. And this work is called Avodat Hashem, the work of God, because it's Adam from the word domeh, similar, that he has to become similar to God. Elokim in Gematria is nature, and in nature there's just one law called love. And then love thy neighbor as thyself, that we need to acquire. And the love in nature brings us to identify, to be similar in form, to be similar, have similar attributes. And then a person is called Adam, that he has to be similar to that same force of nature that is called love. And then we're called a person. Otherwise, if not, then we're called animals. If I'm summarizing this whole part, then this whole process of education and study is acquiring habits, thoughts, behavior that is entirely pointing a person toward coming out of himself. Meaning in his natural tendency, he's inside himself, and education helps him get out and gradually acquire habits and thought patterns that in order to love everything outside of him. And this is a long, gradual process, and this is education. It sounds like a very incredible thing. Maybe now we can feel slightly how much it's a foundation, that without it, there's nothing else to talk about. There's no people, there's no country, there's nothing. If in our program we don't have a program for making a man out of each person, a human, then there's nothing else to talk about. The point of education is a basic point, and without it, nothing else exists. It's a very big perception. That's why we disconnected from Babylon. And this point we need to renew and bring it to the entire world. Because today, if we don't advance with it, the world is in a big descent. We see what's happening. What principles do we have today? Are renewed. There's a very smart saying that's saying hurting a Jew is like hurting the eye. What can be more dear to a person than the sense of sight? It's the strongest and most necessary sense. Why is education seen as a visual item? Through education, you format yourself, you balance yourself, you build yourself, you program yourself, and then through it, you see everything in the world. If it's good or bad, it's positive, negative, good, or worth it or not worth it. All these things, you look at it through the eyes of education. If you take two people with a different education, they'll see the world in a different manner, but their values will be different. One will be enjoying himself, one will be suffering. So when you say that a process of education is the means for taking a person from when he was born like a little animal until he becomes a complete person, the way he looks at himself, the way his viewpoint on his life, what changes? What viewpoint does he need to have? If you look at the world through the glasses of your values, of your glasses, the way we received education, I'm not talking about just Jews in general, the way a person receives education, culture, all the books that he read, everything that he heard, all of Hollywood, everything on TV, everything he sees in the world through the internet today, all this builds a person. He looks at life in this manner, and what he absorbed throughout the first years of his life, that is the foundation for him. There's no way around it. I see it according to his kids. They will be educated according to a certain education. They won't be able to break out. And that's why I'm sure of what they're going to do. Wherever they go, they won't make mistakes, because it's already a foundation in a person. So a perfect education, what glasses do I need to put on a person so that he'll see the world through these glasses? If you could do perfect education, which glasses would you give me as a person that went through the integral education process, and I align myself exactly like a perfect man? It's like Hillel said, Tura asked him, teach me the entire Torah. The Torah is love thy neighbor as thyself. That's the glasses. Until you love thy neighbor as thyself, there's nothing else. What do we say to a child? You're a good child. Don't hit. Don't do this. Don't do that. What's education? The way you relate to your environment, at least with humans, even though with the 4 levels. So we say to him, don't do this, don't do that. Get closer to this, get closer to that. That's the education, that we're always educating him to be like this and to be like this. Those are the basic principles. Don't do to others as you wouldn't want done to yourself. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And then switch places. Switch places. Do the same thing to the other. Say, support him, all the things. Say nice things. I want to speak about the main motives here and how it's connected to what you defined right now, that the education is meant to teach me to be a human, that will show me how to love everything outside of me. One of the main motives is teach a child according to his needs, and that's because no child is similar to the other. And in education, we say, don't do to your friend what you wouldn't want done to yourself, meaning to the extent that he understands what he doesn't want, what he doesn't love, and according to that, we can ask him how to treat his fellow man. Love thy man as your fellow man. And then you need to pass on this behavior to the other. That's what it's called, on this path. To the extent that it suits his character, etc., we just give him the means of the integral education. It's not that we check him anywhere, that we put him down and say, you have to do this and have to do that. No. Because each person has a form of himself. And everyone has an idea how to treat himself and how to treat others. The inner part that's really done, where he becomes like a censor for himself, In this way, he understands the inner part of him, and this is obligatory. And we need to bring each person to a state where they understand who they are, what they are, and to the extent that we can use all our attributes toward the world in a more beneficial manner. That's the main thing. What doesn't exist in any other culture, and what exists in the culture of Israel, the way we relate to the people, the way we relate to the world, that's the foundation of our existence. I'd like us to get in a bit deeper. You're talking about teach a child according to his way. You're saying it means that any person has a special viewpoint. Each of us, even though we're built of 613 desires, like we speak of, each of us has 613 desires, a whole of desires that is unique for him. We each have a desire for food, sex, family, money, respect, intelligence, the 6 main desires. Do you mean knowledge? Yes. Yes, knowledge. Everyone has the inclinations toward it, but each one in a different way. What's more important for me, what's less important for me, and in which way, from which parts of my life, it's all changing. Therefore, we're not heading to a person and giving him, you can't come to me like you come to some athlete and say you need to do this and that's it. I'm not capable with my body and you're not capable with your body either. And that's how it is for everyone. You need to ask him to implement himself, but himself in giving, in bestowal, in love. But he has to check himself and know himself. He has to know his spirit, this entire system of urges and behavior and all kinds of desires and thoughts and weaknesses, everything. He needs to know how he uses everything inside him. That's what we said before about division, that he looks at himself from the side and sees how to use this machine that he received from nature for the good of the environment, which is called don't do unto others as you wouldn't want done to yourself, or even more than that, love thy neighbor as thyself. So let's take the first. Don't do to your friend what you wouldn't want done to you. Now there's me and there's Nitza. What I hate, it's things that I hate. They're only hated by me because I'm special in the world. There's no one else like me. So I have an inner picture what I hate, and any other person has a personal inner picture that is actually about her. Yes. So this is the first search that a person needs to do. First of all, you need to check what you hate, and in that manner, you don't treat her as well. That's the first stage. The second stage, what's hated by me is what I don't love. Yes? If I want to treat my fellow man like this, then I also need to know what she hates, what she doesn't like, and to not treat her in that manner. That's the next stage. After that, I don't only not hate somebody's personal behavior, but rather a person to a person also. I look at the entire world, everything outside of me, and that I hate something in front of me, and I don't want it to be like that. Then I help the people that it will also be like that for them, meaning I convey from myself gradually relationships toward the others. Maybe I'm not explaining it properly, but let's say that who has something to profit here in some business or something, and you are preventing it from him somehow. So when I was in their place, I used to suffer from it. I hated it, of course. Then I need to convey it. I need to help them or to help you, or so as not to hurt anyone. Don't do to others as you wouldn't want done to yourself. Brings us to a wide spectrum of deeds and things we can do. Everything that I used to feel as a negative thing, I attempt to prevent from everyone. And according to everyone's nature, not according to my nature. That was hated by you, meaning something you can't suffer, across from your ego, a list of things. And you need to get into your fellow man and learn their nature and do everything to prevent them from suffering. And every man completes this process in a special unit that's suited for him. Its implementation will be private, of course, because everyone has all those desires, knowledge. Everyone has those same things, but some have more, some have less. And therefore, no one can judge anyone else. Why? And nobody can reach you because your attributes will always keep you where you are. That's why you can't judge anyone else. You can only help the other, and that's it. That's why our entire generation, our entire education is based on example. It's not done by force. It's only done by nature. I teach and I give an example. And only from that, the other receives the example, and it continues to go on and exist. And your store looks really great. And then I know I'm giving them an example, and this is how they will grasp it, and this is how they'll learn it. Only from examples. You can tell them anything you want, but if he doesn't see an example, it won't be absorbed. Open this up a bit more. How do I know that I'm not putting him down? You're not demanding anything from yourself, but only according to what's written. And you're not demanding more from what you're obligated to give him as an example that you're carrying out. If a child knows that you're carrying out, and that's why you're demanding from him to carry it out, that he's copying from daddy, for him it's not difficult. He's proud of it. He's proud to go and do it right away. The example, it's just an example. All the words are just rubbish. You said before that the air has to be full of, like, electricity. And what does it have to be? In concern for others. I don't look after myself. I look at my environment, and then we have around us an environment that will not allow anything bad to break out. Our time is up. Thank you very much, Rav Laitman. It was fascinating. Thank you, Nitza. Thank you for being with us. We're going to continue with this subject. Be with us until next time. Until next time, all the best. New life.